As of March 2024, Alberta's oil sands industry accounts for 5.3% of Canada's entire gross domestic product. That is $142 billion flowing through a single provincial pipeline of economic activity. And right now, that pipeline is fracturing. Here is what nobody is telling you. Between January 2025 and December 2026, a perfect storm of collapsing global oil demand, stranded asset valuations, and provincial debt obligations could trigger something we have not witnessed since 1982, a made-in-Canada recession born entirely from our dependence on a single commodity in a single province. The official story is that diversification is working, that Alberta has moved beyond oil, that the Trans Mountain expansion has secured our export future. The real data tells a different story entirely. The year was 1986. Oil prices collapsed from $27 per barrel to under $10 in just 4 months. Alberta's economy contracted by 7.1%. Unemployment surged to 10.3%. Real estate values in Calgary dropped by 30% almost overnight. Families abandoned homes. Banks failed. The Mulroney government scrambled to contain the damage. But here is what made 1986 survivable. Canada's manufacturing sector still employed 2.1 million workers. Ontario's automotive industry absorbed displaced workers. Quebec's aerospace sector expanded. The national economy had shock absorbers. Those shock absorbers no longer exist. Manufacturing employment has declined from 2.1 million in 1986 to 1.7 million today. Ontario's automotive sector now produces 30% fewer vehicles than in 2000. The economic pillows that once cushioned regional shocks have been deflated, removed, eliminated through decades of policy choices. And now we face something potentially worse than 1986. Let me be clear. This is not about whether oil prices will fall. That is almost certain given current trajectory. This is about what happens when they do, and whether Canada's economic structure can absorb the impact. There are exactly 5 reasons why 2026 represents a critical inflection point for Canadian economic stability. 5 mechanisms that are converging simultaneously for the first time in our nation's history. Mechanism 1. Global oil demand is peaking earlier than anyone predicted. The International Energy Agency's World Energy Outlook 2023 stated definitively that global oil demand will peak before 2030, but recent data suggests this peak may arrive as early as 2026. Chinese EV adoption has exceeded every forecast. India's solar capacity additions have doubled projections. European industrial efficiency gains have accelerated post-Ukraine. What does this mean practically? It means 23% of Alberta's provincial budget comes directly from non-renewable resource revenue. Compare this to Texas at 8% or Norway at 14%. Alberta is uniquely vulnerable among all major oil-producing jurisdictions on Earth. The Heritage Fund, established in 1976 to save resource wealth for future generations, currently holds $23.4 billion. Norway's equivalent fund holds $1.4 trillion. We had the same opportunity. We made different choices. Mechanism 3. The stranded asset problem has begun. Let me explain this carefully because mainstream media is not covering this adequately. Oil sands projects require 20 to 30 years of production to generate returns on initial capital investment. When you spend $12 billion building a SAGD facility, you need decades of stable prices above $65 per barrel to break even. But institutional investors are already pricing in shortened production windows between September 2023 and February 2024. The combined market capitalization of Canada's 5 largest oil sands producers declined by $47 billion. This was not due to current prices. This was due to future expectations. Major pension funds, including CalPERS, the California Public Employees Retirement System, have divested entirely from oil sands holdings. Here is what this means for Alberta. These companies employ 140,000 workers directly. They support another 350,000 indirect jobs. They pay $8.1 billion annually in provincial and federal taxes. And their investors are telling us something profound about 2026 and beyond. Mechanism for FL transfer payment mathematics are about to collide with political reality. Alberta currently receives $0 in equalization payments while contributing $21.5 billion annually to federal revenues. This is the source of profound regional resentment. But here is the mechanism nobody discusses publicly. If Alberta's economy contracts significantly, its contribution to federal revenues drops proportionally. If oil prices fall to $45 per barrel, which they reached briefly in 2020, Alberta's federal tax contribution could decline by 30 to 40%. That is $7 to $9 billion suddenly missing from federal books. Simultaneously, Alberta would suddenly qualify for equalization payments. The province that has contributed the most would begin drawing from the pool. The political shock of this reversal could fracture Confederation more profoundly than any constitutional crisis since 1982. Mechanism 5. And this is the one that keeps economists awake at night. Real estate contagion. Calgary's housing market has recovered dramatically since 2020. Prices have increased 34% from pandemic lows. Young families have purchased homes at these elevated prices with minimal down payments. The average household debt in Alberta has reached 207% of disposable income. The correlation between oil prices and Calgary real estate values is 0.87. For non-statisticians, that is extraordinarily tight. When oil falls, Alberta housing follows within 6 to 9 months. Every time, without exception. If Calgary real estate values decline 25%, which they did in 2015-2016, we would see 340,000 households in negative equity. That is, mortgages exceeding home values. Banks tighten lending. Consumer spending collapses. The spiral begins. Let me be clear. This is not a prediction that recession will happen. This is an analysis of the mechanisms that could make it happen. The structure exists. The kindling is stacked. The question is whether a match appears. And speaking of matches, we need to examine a case study, a precedent that illuminates exactly how regional resource dependence can trigger national economic crisis. The year was 2014. Venezuela had the largest proven oil reserves on Earth, 303 billion barrels. More than Saudi Arabia, more than Iran, more than Iraq. Their economy had grown 4.8% annually for a decade. Government spending had created universal health care, subsidized education, and reduced poverty by 40%. International media praised the Venezuelan model. Then oil prices fell from $115 in June 2014 to $28 in January 2016, and 76% collapse. What followed represents the most severe peacetime economic collapse in Western Hemisphere history. GDP contracted by 75% over 5 years. Inflation exceeded 1 million% annually. Alberta cannot print currency. But Alberta has built a fiscal apparatus that requires sustained oil revenues to function. When prices fall, the provincial government faces only 4 options. Slash services, borrow massively, introduce new taxes, or seek federal bailouts. Each option carries severe consequences, and each option would transmit economic pain across provincial borders. Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of Canada and Bank of England, wrote extensively about this in his 2021 book, Valuations. He specifically identified Canadian resource dependency as a systemic risk requiring intervention. The repricing event he describes is not hypothetical. It happened to Australian coal in 2022. It happened to German lignite in 2020. It is happening to American coal right now. and the physics of climate change ensure it will happen to oil sands production. The only question is timing. So let us map exactly how this crisis would unfold. There are 4 distinct stages. 4 steps from initial shock to national contagion. Stage 1. Price collapse trigger. Between April 2026 and August 2026, global oil prices decline from current levels near $75 to below $50. This could occur due to recession in China, accelerated EV adoption, Saudi-Russian production disputes, or simply continued demand destruction. The specific trigger matters less than the price level. At $50 per barrel, oil sands projects become marginally profitable at best. New investment halts immediately. Exploration budgets drop to zero. The first wave of 15,000 to 20,000 layoffs begins within 90 days. Stage 2. Provincial fiscal crisis. Alberta's budget projects $4.3 billion surplus for 2024 to 2025, based on oil price assumptions of $74 per barrel. At $50, that surplus becomes a $6 billion deficit overnight. Premier and Cabinet face impossible choices. Cut healthcare by $2 billion. Delay infrastructure projects. Freeze public sector wages. Each decision creates additional economic contraction. Each cut removes spending from local economies. The multiplier effect works in reverse. Credit rating agencies, specifically Moody's and S&P, place Alberta on negative watch. Borrowing costs increase, so the deficit expands further. Stage 3. Real estate cascade. By February 2027, oil sector layoffs have reached 45,000 workers. These are high-income households. They stop spending. They list homes for sale. They default on vehicle loans. Local businesses dependent on their patronage begin closing. Calgary real estate prices fall 15% by spring 2027, then another 10% by fall. Every additional decline creates more negative equity, more defaults, more bank losses. And here's where contagion begins. Canadian banks have concentrated exposure to Alberta real estate. TD Bank holds $67 billion in Alberta mortgages. RBC holds $71 billion. When default rates triple, these become national banking sector concerns. Stage 4. National transmission. The Bank of Canada faces impossible conditions by late 2027. Inflation may persist in other regions while Alberta deflates. Interest rate policy cannot address both problems simultaneously. Federal deficits expand as Alberta's tax contributions shrink and EI claims surge. Ontario and Quebec discover their transfer payment assumptions no longer hold. The currency weakens as international investors question Canadian stability, and the national economy enters technical recession. This is not fantasy. This is mechanism. Each stage follows logically from the previous. Each stage has historical precedent. Your retirement is directly exposed to this risk, and nobody is explaining how. The Canada Pension Plan holds 11.4% of its assets in Canadian equities. Approximately $27 billion sits in companies directly connected to Alberta's oil economy. If the scenario described unfolds, CPP returns would underperform precisely when retirees need stability. Your employer pension, if you have one, likely holds similar exposure. Your RRSP, if invested in Canadian index funds, contains 18 to 22% energy sector weighting. Your home equity, if you own property anywhere in Canada, would face stress as national economic conditions deteriorate. Let me be clear about what this means practically. If you are 55 years old planning to retire at 65, severe 2026 to 2028 recession could delay that retirement by 3 to 5 years. If you are 35 years old building wealth, a prolonged recovery period could reduce lifetime savings accumulation by 12 to 15%. If you are 70 years old drawing down savings, sequence of returns risk becomes acute. The CPP Investment Board has begun reducing Canadian energy exposure, down from 14% in 2020 to 11.4% today. They see these risks. They are acting. The question is whether you are. Between October 2025 and March 2026, watch for these specific indicators. Weekly U.S. oil inventory reports exceeding 440 million barrels. Chinese EV sales exceeding 55% of new vehicle purchases. Major oil sands project cancellations or indefinite postponements. Alberta government mid-year budget revisions projecting deficits. Any two of these indicators appearing simultaneously suggests elevated probability of the scenario described. All four appearing together suggests near certainty. But here is the deeper question, the one that transcends economics entirely. Has Canada made a collective choice about what kind of nation we want to become? Have we deliberately decided to concentrate wealth and risk in extractive industries? Or have we simply drifted into this dependency through decades of path-dependent decisions? The Heritage Fund contained $12.7 billion in 1987. If Alberta had simply matched Norway's savings rate, it would contain $400 billion today, enough to fund provincial services indefinitely regardless of oil prices. We had the resources. We had the model. We had 40 years. The real question is not whether 2026 brings recession. The real question is whether Canadians can collectively agree on a different economic structure. Whether we can build an economy that does not rise and fall with commodity prices set in London and New York and Shanghai. Because if we cannot, this will happen again, and again, and again, till the last barrel is extracted or the last customer disappears. The choice remains ours. For now. If this analysis helped you understand risks that mainstream media ignores, subscribe now. We publish weekly examinations of the economic forces shaping your financial future. Hit the notification bell, because when 2026 arrives, you will want to see what comes next. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. Leave your thoughts below. Until next time, stay informed. Stay prepared.